Welcome again, everyone. There are some new people maybe, so just for their advantage, I welcome all of you on behalf of Sri Aurobindo Yoga Foundation. We are celebrating Siddhi Day, which was on 24th. It's a wonderful opportunity for all of us to be together for this great occasion. And today's topic is a little bit different, Problems of Mahabharat. Many people have asked me why problems, why not just Mahabharat? But to me, Mahabharat is full of problems, controversies, conflicts, dharma, adharma, what side to take. So I'll leave it, Alokji, to dwell on that subject. And we may have some question at the end, Alokji, we can leave some time for the question and answer. That will really be great. Thank you, Alokji.
Namaste. Frankly, the music was just too deep and it may take time for words to come out from the silence where it took us. But let me start with gratitude to Sri Aurobindo and the Mother, who have given a light which on the one side leads us to the future. And not just a future, luminous future. In the world as it is, where everybody is speaking about doomsday and a bleak future, here is not just a beacon of light, but a lighthouse, the sunlight, if I may say so, which shows that beyond the night, there is this beautiful dawn, not just waiting for us, it's already come, and all that we need is to open the curtains of the windows, and we shall be able to feel its pulsations in our heart, in our mind, in our life itself. So gratitude to them. And this light also throws, this is an all-encompassing light. He not only shows us the future, shows us the present crisis and how humanity should steer through it. And then this light reveals to us the documents of the past and what they really mean. And when Sri Aurobindo speaks of these documents of the past, it seems that he is reliving what he has already experienced in a particular age. There's a beautiful line from Savitri which comes to my mind. An archivist of the symbols of the beyond, he bore the stamp of mighty memories. And this is what I feel when I read Mother and Sri Aurobindo on these various subjects, that they are not just interpreting something, not even in the light of their experience, which has gone way beyond the traditional limits of spiritual experience, but something which they brought together. She remembers. I remember one of the stories when Mother was watching a film. I think it was on Rani Lakshmi Bai, and she said, "This is not how it happened." And at another time when she was, she went to a palace and she saw, and suddenly she said, "This is not how it is, the way they describe it." So when Sri Aurobindo describes about the Mahabharata, you can clearly see that this is not just a historical way of revealing things, but things which are self-revealed. And here a new aspect of Sri Aurobindo comes in, which we have hardly touched in all his standard biographies. We have so many aspects of Sri Aurobindo, but nowhere we see Sri Aurobindo the historian. Now, Sri Aurobindo the historian is not just telling us outer facts and figures, but the deeper import of history. And it's not just Indian history, mind you. He speaks about Western history. He speaks about, ancient, the way tribes came together, they joined. And he makes such a beautiful comparative study of history. So let's come with that to the issue of Mahabharat. Once again, salutations to Mahabharati, Mother India, for opening so many doors to spiritual life. And this is something so wonderful that every path she has opened. Look at the Vedas and the Upanishads. So those endowed with a kind of intuitive spiritual sense, a kind of intellectual mind which is ready to receive higher light, take that route, the Vedas and the Upanishads. But there are those who have a heart of bhakti, the religious sense. So you have the Puranas, those who want to understand the technology of the cosmos. So you have the Tantras, everything leading you toward the one. And for those who want to understand spirituality in flesh and blood, So it's okay that, okay, this is what the Vedas tell us, this is what the Upanishad tell us, and this is how it should be. All things which are beautiful and high and true. But we want to know how is it in terms of real life, because that's the ultimate hallmark of true spiritual living. So we have the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. So Ramayana and the Mahabharata are not just, they are known as itihasas, and itihas literally means itihas. So it happened. So there is a story around which, legend, you may call it, a story, a real story around which the whole superstructure has been developed. So there is a nucleus, itihas. But why these epics have continued to endure is, one is because they've sprung from the soul of a nation. That's how all true epic must spring. And it has sprung from the soul of a nation. Sri Aurobindo even says it is not one person or few persons who have written Mahabharata. It is the soul of India which has written Mahabharata. Its peoples, the story of its people, its life, its culture, its tradition, all that is embodied here. So again, it's not just history in the sense of just the war and what happened in an epoch of time, but how a people lived, how they conceived life, how they connected with it, all the various aspects and dimensions in real time. That's what we see in Ramayana and the Mahabharata. Of course, there is a little difference because Ramayana describes that both are tales of evolutionary crisis when humanity is going through a moment of evolutionary crisis. But the difference is that Ramayana is in an early humanity which is flush with the sense of divinity, very intuitive. When we look at the early stage of humanity, when the mind does not come in to rope in and change things, it still lives in its pristine purity, simplicity. The moods are so much direct, and still, when Valmiki describes these emotions, he lifts them to such sublimity, colors them. It's like a ocean of feelings which is flowing and taking different shapes, shades, forms. It's amazing. And every character is taken to a zenith. For instance, we have the Ravana. So Ravana is, you won't find another, what we may call as demon in the whole history of demonhood as Ravana, in every which way. He exceeds on every dimension, this titan. But equally, when we look at Rama, you can't find another character like Rama. In Ram, in every aspect of life, again, he exceeds in every way we can imagine. So does Sita. And, that way, it's a story when humanity is still in its more animal, Rakshasic, Asuric stage. And Ram brings it the light of reason and illumination to take it further. But since the subject today is Mahabharata, in Mahabharata, we see a different style. Though that, again, there is the evolutionary issue, there is the common theme in all Indian epics, primarily in the way Indian mind understood morality or dharma, is they saw in this creation a battle between the forces of darkness and light. This is germane to Indian thought. One of the things which we find in the Vedas, in the Puranas, in countless legends. And we always understood life as these two forces, one which want to disintegrate, another which want to integrate, take things up. And human beings had to make a choice, nations had to make a choice, kingdoms had to make a choice, especially when things stood at an evolutionary crisis. So we see again in Vyas, its style is very different. It's very direct, mighty, strong, but its intensity is subdued. When we read the Ramayana, the intensity carries, you are almost carried away by the intensity. But Mahabharata doesn't give that kind of feel. Mahabharata rather absorbs you in the scenes and the substance that is going through. It's like you are watching a movie and you are just enjoying it. Ramayana, you are experiencing the emotions that are taking place in the heart of the subject. So there is a little difference. Vyas is much more direct, much more straight, much more simple. He doesn't, if I use a more modern terminology, he doesn't mince words. So, he's not ornamental that way. But he conveys his point with a great strength, with a great power. So this is what the Mahabharata is. Again, a story of evolutionary crisis when humanity has to choose a way. One of the two. One is, of course, the way of dharma, and the other is the way of adharma. If it chooses the way of adharma, it is bound to take evolutionary impulsion in creation, of which human beings are the highest at this point of time catalyst, centuries backward. Or if it follows that upward, it will take leaps and bounds. So here is the story where we see that there are two forces which are constantly acting. Indian thought understood it so well, and we'll see how relevant it is in today's times. So there is in the formation of a nation, actually even in the world, but let's take, because especially the Indian nation, we have seen these forces act with great intensity. And one is the centripetal force and the other is the centrifugal. So centripetal force is those we want to build an empire, Akhand Bharat. So that's how we see that, there is a tendency in India to build a unified, not uniform, but a unified congery of nations. India is a subcontinent. There were many small little, not just tribes, but kingdoms. To weave them together because they are tied by a common cultural bond, and to create a land of dharma. So there is the centripetal force. And on the other side, there are small little nations or kingdoms which want to break away the centripetal force. So this we see in not only in Mahabharata, we see it much earlier. For instance, in the as early as Parshuram. Now we all know the story, but if we really look at it, even in fact, he is one of the earliest one. We see that Haya kingdom had almost created an empire, huge empire, very brilliant warriors, including this man who ultimately killed Rishi Jamdagni, father of Parshuram. There, that's where the Kshatriya impulse went wrong and it became very arrogant. But before that, Kartveer Arjun is a man who is trying to create an empire based on dharma. But then, well, he slips, whatever, that's rest is history. And during that time, Parshuram slays all the Kshatriyas which he could find in any pocket, because he said, no, this arrogance doesn't go with his conception of what dharma should be. So it's a very amazing tale. And then comes this lineage of, there is simultaneously a lineage of Ikshvaku kings. They are the first ones who have created real empires. So one of them is Bhagirath of the fame of Ganges Avtaran. He also created an empire based on dharma. There is another king, Mandhata. He also created an empire. All of them are Raghukul Reet, Sadachaliyai, Pranajaya, Parvachan Najai. They all belong to the great clan of Raghu, immortalized in works of Kalidas, Raghuvansham. So they were the ones who tried to build an empire, and they succeeded. If you look at Ram's journey all the way from Ayodhya to Lanka, and why do they want to build an empire? It's very interesting. This empire is not built for just aggrandizing oneself or gathering the resources and looting and plundering, not at all. We see as early as Ramayana, look at the nobility of the emperor. I mean, Lord Ram has conquered, but nowhere he proclaims that I am the king. He says, I am acting on behalf of Bharat. And wherever he has conquered, he coronates the local tribal chieftain as the king. So Vibhishan becomes the king in Lanka. Sugriv becomes the king in Kishkinda. Though he has gone through, and they have either through pact or conquest, all of them. So it was a congery of nations. Empires in the Indian context never meant destroying the life of the conquered. So one of the things about the Aryan civilization is that it does conquer, but it ennobles what it conquers. So in the Asuric way of life, it brings in the idea of dharma and then leaves them free in their own way to develop it, to follow it. And, so this is something which we find as early as the time of Lord Ram. And we also find there a very interesting idea of the king. So, it is again very relevant in today's times also. So who is the king in the Indian context? No, he is not a depot. So king is largely, if we look at it closely, he doesn't lift his arm and say, my word is final. Nowhere you see there is the king who has the final word. But there is the assembly of chieftains, the warlords, and he must consult them. This is just like the ancient Greeks. Sri Aurobindo's Ilion, you see the book of assembly in Mahabharata, the Sabha Parv. So Dhritarashtra calls all the chieftains and they will give their ideas, viewpoint. He will listen to all of them. Final decision he will take. It's like our president. So he takes the final decision, but it is always with the council of minister. And then there is the voice of the people. So all these three things have always gone together, the Janpads. So this is how Indian confederation has evolved, and it's important to understand because it has its rootings now also. Now, when we look at Mahabharata time, we see that there are three types of forces which are acting, or three types of kingdoms. So one is the kingdom which are going toward the east, northern and eastern side. So you have among them I think Kaushal is kingdom. Magad is a great empire, Jarasandh. And then you have Chedi, Shishupal's empire. And all these kingdoms. And further, if we go, we have Mats. And then there are western and southern kingdoms. And then there are central kingdoms. So central kingdoms are very powerful. Bhoj. And some of them come from the lineage of Ikshvaku. So when they align during the Mahabharata war, and Sri Aurobindo uses it to explain that the war has really happened. And he uses a very different approach to the whole thing. Because people often say there was no war, it's all symbolic, whether it was actually written or not written, all these controversies. Sri Aurobindo says, if a war really happened, then in the whole storyline, the causes of war must be evident. What led to the war? And then he analyzes how beautifully Vyas has presented the political scenario. So there were this tendency to form empires, as we have seen Ikshvaku clan, Haya dynasty, and then the latest was Kuru Empire. Now, these empires were important because if the empires are not important at that point of time, you will have the centripetal forces and there'll be no nation unit. So nation is like a Yajna-Vedi, a land where a certain group life, which is of course varied, stratified, heterogeneous, but it evolves a certain way of life. That's a nation soul is meant to be. So we see that during the Mahabharata time, you have these three types of one are those who are siding with Duryodhana. And very interesting, people who are siding with Duryodhana are from the west, right, going up to Kandahar, Gandhar, and you go further south. Now, these people in the southern states, including, Shalya, who actually is a relative of the Pandavas, but he doesn't side with them. And what a astute political statesman, not statesman, but political analyst Vyas is. Now, why they are siding with Duryodhan? Of course, we have a very picturesque story built around it. But simply because these regions wanted autonomy and they wanted a weak king. Put it in modern context and see what are the forces which want weak center. Precisely those who want to be free and autonomous. They don't want any central authority. So you will see even today, there are people who are siding with a weak center. They want a weak center. They want a weak center which is all the time appeasing, because this way they have by autonomy means they will do whatever they feel like doing. So these are the people who sided with Duryodhana because they knew. And it's interesting, Gandhari also points this out. Gandhari says that my son, he may win the war, but he is not worthy of being a Chakravarti Samrat because he won't be able to hold the kingdom more than, for maybe a less than half a century. So they are standing behind him. They want Duryodhan to be king. Why? Because they're not interested in Duryodhan. They want their autonomy. This is the one part. Then in Bengal, you have on the further side, you have the Angdesh. Angdesh goes further in the east. That we know is a bought over whole story. But then there are others who have a axe to grind against the Kuru Empire. Why? Because Kuru Empire is the last which has come. So all the certain clans which were eyeing on becoming an emperor themselves, they have an axe to grind. So we see that Jarasandh and Chedi, the Magad and Chedi empire, though Krishna has got them killed, yet they join forces with Pandavas. It's very interesting. Same we see with Drupad and, of course, Mats, Naresh, Virat and the Panchals, they go with Pandavas. But it's very interesting that Chedi and Magad empire, these two empires, their kings were actually killed. Shishupal by Shri Krishna in the Rajsuya Yagna. And we see that Magad emperor Jarasandh is killed. Shri Krishna gets him killed because he, right from the beginning, we understand what Krishna's work was. He was trying to build a nation against heavy odds. And he knew that each of them has the ambition to become an emperor. And they are capable. Jarasandh was a very, very strong and mighty king. And he looked after his subjects quite well, regardless of, whatever his tendencies were. And so also with Shishupal, Bhurishava, all these people wanted to have an empire. And they knew that their challenge is against the Kuru clan. And if they came together, they could probably defeat the Kuru. This is the ambition they were holding. So when their kings go away, they still side with Pandava. because they want to see the Kuru kingdom defeated. At least they will have a share in the empire. So we have this clan. And then there is Koshalas, the Kaushal and Bhoj and Panchal, especially. Now they stand they stand solid because they have tasted, particularly some of them belong to the lineage of Ikshvaku, Kaushal, Mats. So they know what an empire is. So they want an empire. They don't want a weak, united India. They want India to be, I'm using the term which is more modern, but Aryavarth, Bharatvarsh to be strong, united, because they understand that that is what will make everybody prosperous and happy. So the way Vyas analyzes and how Shri Krishna has seen that entire geopolitical scenario is something which is I think it's worth a thesis, that how he analyzed and how he went about creating a nation based on dharma. So he starts with the Rajasuya Yagya of Yudhishthir. And we see how Vyas described, it's very interesting. Vyas always stops short of his characters are also superhuman, but he keeps them within the range of humanity. He will not let them exceed a point. See, Ram is evidently superhuman. When he fights, it's impossible. Who is this warrior who can shake all the that's what even Mandodari says when she comes to meet Ram after Ravana has died. And she says, I'm sorry, I had no choice but to, I am the Aparadhi, I have killed your husband, I am the one. He says, no, that's not what I have come. I have come to see who is this man so great that he could kill my husband who had conquered all the three worlds. Who could be so great? So when you look at Ram, he is beyond anything you can imagine. You won't find such characters in Mahabharata. Bhishma is great. He has Ikshamrityu, trained by Parshuram. All that is good. They have celestial weapons, but none of them which goes beyond. He stops short. He subdues them, because the crisis is not the earlier crisis of humanity, but when humanity is already there and it has developed all kinds of weapons, equipment, and now it has to choose a particular path. And one of the works of Sri Krishna was to establish a nation. You see, when Rama came, he established Aryavarth out of Jambudvip. It was a Jambudvip, known as Jambudvip because it had water on three sides. Then, or also three dweeps, that's how it was also known as. And that's where the term Dravid came, which has been so much distorted. Dravid literally means Draud, is surrounded by water on three sides. This is what the name means. And it has been turned into it referred to India. It has been turned into a very different kind of a, what shall I say, the divide, to create a divide between the Indian people. All through there was a single culture. Single culture, Indian culture is in single, it is many hued and many colored. But that's a different subject altogether. So we see that one of the work of Shri Krishna, which goes unnoticed, because on one side, we see him as a super miraculous figure in Bhagavad. In Mahabharata, he is not described like that. Nowhere. There is only one place. Now, you can feel that Vyas is portraying him as if it is understood that he is a godhead, but it's nowhere mentioned. Vyas doesn't bring it out. He leaves it to us. But he portrays him as the one who is the center of everything. So that's why these people, Shishupal has a problem with Krishna, because he knows behind Rajasuya Yagya, it is Krishna. Bhurishrava has a problem with Krishna because he knows that behind the building of this empire, it is Krishna. And of course, we shouldn't forget the Yadavas, because these were the three main empires, the Magad, the Kuru, and the Yadavs. So Yadavs were very, they were very valiant warriors, mighty, but they were in a certain sense confused about what side they should take. Because if you see, after the Chandravanshis, Suryavanshis, and the Chandravanshis are coming to a halt, then we see the Yadavs are taking predominance. So the Yadav clan, the Yadukul, it was a divided house in its own right. They didn't know which way to go fully. And in the house of Dhritarashtra, we see that there are these two kinds of, that's again a very divided house. Why? Because the elders, they want to remain with dharma. So we have Dhritarashtra, we have Bhishma and Kripacharya, and of course Drona, who wants to, Vidur, they all want to go with dharma. So, but yet very strangely, they end up taking sides with Duryodhana. And Sri Aurobindo gives a very different understanding to this. He says that basically they were strongly attached to the idea of Kuru Empire. So they knew that dharma is with Pandavas. But right now the empire is Kuru. So they are also that way Kuru. After all, in the larger context, we call them Pandavas because they are son of Pandu. But they are also belong to the same Kuru clan. But after much thought, why Bhishma and Drona don't side with them? They could have done that because they see behind them the Panchals and the Mats. And therefore, they feel that if the Pandavas win, Kuru empire will be threatened because it will be basically the Panchals and Mats Naresh who will rule. So the way he analyzes the situation, if we apply today to modern India, when Sri Aurobindo said that, I don't know why they keep painting me as a philosopher, not exact words, but I have the politician and the poet in me. And you understand what he means by politics. Politics is not about just, power, not at all. It's an instrument for the divine to create a land of dharma, a group of people who can be guided by dharma. There is no other. Individual can be guided by his own inner development. But how do you govern a group of people according to dharma? So the whole dilemma of Sri Krishna is how to establish a kingdom which is based on dharma. So he starts removing these ambitious kings. Jarasandh is the first one to take the toll. Then, of course, Shishupal has already been eliminated. Then come these entire, from Jayadratha and all this Kandahar, all those Sindhu Desh. So Sindhu Desh is modern Pakistan and Kandahar is Afghanistan. So India was extending all this. So this is my answer to, when Chinese say that, this belonged to us. So I say, we start saying that from Afghanistan, it all belonged to us. I mean, this is documented. This is all in history. Even if you Google search the map of ancient India, you'll see all these kingdoms mapped out. And they were following the common culture. I mean, Gandhari is a Shiva Bhakt. It doesn't matter that, Shakuni was that is okay. Good and bad people exist, but the culture was the same. It was not a different culture. So we see that in this, Sri Krishna, keeps a vigil over, because Aryavarta has gone into all these different areas. There are different kingdoms, and each is now trying to build an empire. So actually, ultimately, even then, till the end, he wants to avoid the war. Now here, there is very interesting exchange between Vidur and Sri Krishna. When Sri Krishna goes to ask Vidur for the Shanti, to ask for 5 villages. So Vidur counsels Krishna. He says, why have you come? Now Vidur is in another strange dilemma. He knows that dharma is on the side of Pandava. But he also doesn't want the Kuru empire to be gone. So at one point, he also tries to counsel that, why you are asking all this, it's okay, And that's how we see that Sanjay goes and communicates to the Pandavas that, look here, he's Tauji. He's requesting you that you better take sannyas, leave all this, why you want to fight. And then comes the entire background, and then the war develops. So it is a true story of a real war. But here Sri Aurobindo brings out how through war and conflict, just as in individual life, you can't make a progress if you want to close your eyes to war. At some point, you have to face the conflict inside squarely. You have to make a choice. If you keep on taking the Equisthenian position, whatever it is called, it doesn't take us very far. It may steer it may make you in a kind of put you in a comfort zone, but not the greatness and glory and nobility and heroism which Mahabharata is about. So we see that war is, Sri Aurobindo speaks about it. One of the places when Sri Aurobindo was asked that, well, sir, now there is peace. This is after the, I think, Second World War. most likely. Yeah, or the First World War. Anyways, he was asked, now there is peace and now we will have the fulfillment of the dream of the new world. He says the new world is not likely to come this way. Most likely it is likely to come through war. Because another aphorism where he says, men die so that man may live and God be born. So we have not understood what is the sense of these conflicts in the individual and at a larger scale. This conflict is always invariably between two kinds of forces. One which move towards the higher forms of life, higher forms of life expression, another which want to pull us back downwards towards a old form. And behind all this, there is on one side the Devas and the other side are the Asuras. Asuras are fighting only for self-aggrandizement, for satisfying their ambition, for position, for crushing those, the subjects, whereas the Devas also fight, and Devas find to release Dharma into a group of humanity. They are fighting for that. So we see this Mahabharata, a classical tale of the war between, no, it's not a fratricidal war alone. It's not even a war of two civilizations. It's one civilization. But it is a war where a nation or a civilization has to choose, not by a democratic vote, because that didn't exist at that time, even though they were janpads. There was a full-fledged, proper king and democracy together in India. Though it was not the way we have assemblies in the Greeks. If you read Indian literature, it's so interesting that the people had a say. That's why that washerman had a say. And Ram had to consent because the voice of the people had its own place. The final decision had to be made by the king. The king could overrun it, or the king could keep it. That was left to the king to make a choice. But the people had their voice. They could voice their opinion and they could speak about it. They were not stifled as in certain countries. And that's what actually, in a way, the world will eventually move toward that. But that apart. So war is something where we, at its root, it's a war of idea. So idea of a nation in the light of the way we understand from the Indian spiritual point of view, that ultimately at the core is dharma. So in Mahabharata, we see many, many kind of dilemmas. So this is the other aspect of Mahabharata, that we see many dilemmas which are unique, which even today we don't face. And yet Vyas has solved them by an understanding of dharma which is too deep and profound and subtle, which doesn't fall into a typical rule book of right and wrong. For example, when Draupadi is married to 5 brothers, so on one side, it is the dharma to follow your mother's word. Why it is dharma? Because, well, mother is the one. You see, it was not like today we say, oh, I don't care whatever the parents are saying. Now, the reason that age it was, especially mother's word, father's word was not so important, right? Then and then we have several examples where people had problems with what the father had said. And they came into conflict. Nachiketa is one example. There are several others. But mother's word was important because it was understood that the mother will never give a counsel to a child which would harm him. Fathers may be blinded by their own ambition and give a counsel, not to harm, but they may drive the child along paths which are not very healthy. Though we have, of course, all kinds of combinations. Kaikasi, which was mother of Ravana, gave him a wrong counsel that you must become Daityaraj. But still, we see that mothers used to give that. So mother's word carried that great authority. And these Pandava brothers, they knew that, their mother is, how she has brought them up with such hardship. So they have given their mother this place. And when the mother says, distribute what you have won equally amongst all of you. Now, it's a great dilemma. I don't think that in the entire history of mankind, a woman has faced such a dilemma where she is simultaneously married to 5 men. And she could have just said, I don't care, I'll just go away. I'll lead my own life. Or she could have insisted. Nobody would have forced her, neither Yudhishthir nor Kunti. And yet she chooses that, no, I'll stay married with these 5 brothers. Now comes a very complex tale. We see that when they go back, this is challenged in the Kuru Sabha, that how can Yudhishthir claim to be the claimant hired to a throne when he has married a woman who is married to his 4 brothers. So all these dynamics go in. And these subtleties of dharma, which of course, it's a very vast subject, as someone has rightly said, are brought out. And then again, we see that ultimately, what does Vyas do? He brings in as the ultimate authority. Look here, he never, nowhere he says any, nowhere he portrays Krishna as a, divine, though there is this sense of divinity which runs through, except one word. When through the characters he describes Krishna, there is only one place where he uses the word aprameya, which means immeasurable. That's the only word which conveys all. Otherwise, it doesn't say anything anywhere. See, those stories of Gokul and all, they are not part of Mahabharata, though they are shown as that. You have Srimad Bhagavat Puran where you find these stories. So there is no miraculous Krishna there. Krishna is close to human, and yet time to time one can sense the Godhead in Vyas Mahabharata. And yet he calls him at one point Aprame. But yet he brings in the Gita. Now surely people often, with regard to Gita, they say that it has been imposed. Now people say that Vyas Mahabharata, there are different authors. Sri Aurobindo agrees that yes, there are different authors. But unlike many Western-based scholars who say that ultimately they were just about 8,000 slokas, he says no, they were 24 to 26,000. And then there are others, because it's a book of roughly 1 lakh slokas. So he says when you study the style, you can know the difference. And one classic example he gives is of, on one side, when Vyas describes the war and all these, there is a high nobility in Vyas. He doesn't, it's like for Vyas, something like romance is out of question. When you read Vyas, it looks like that. Unlike Ramayana, where you feel there is so much in the air which is about love. Vyas doesn't mince words. So, Draupadi gets married in the Swamvar and everybody gets married in the Swamvar. But even Savitri's story, there is very noble and mature story. There is 1 or 2 places where we see that there is the Ramayana style. So once the story is Ruru, though there is not so much of romance in it as a sacrifice of love. But the only story where we see a touch of romance is in the air, and that is the story of Nal and Damayanti. So we know that in Mahabharata there are several tales. Each tale is a tale of dharma. Savitri is a tale of dharma. There is even the death, the cosmic deities have their dharma. And Savitri has to remind them, teach them what dharma is. Then of course in the tale of Nal and Damayanti, it's all about dharma. Ruru and Pramadva writes about dharma. So from every angle, he has given practically every situation, dilemmas we may face in life. And it's a very complex thing. It's not something as simple. We oversimplify with our, what shall I say, instead of a thought which is all encompassing, when we have a very linear thought. So we have binaries. Karna is good or Karna is bad. This is the way of binary thinking, where you have a linear thought that, well, injustice was done to him at birth, and therefore you sympathize with him. This is not how a man of dharma sees. He doesn't go with that. And we see in Mahabharata several instances where adhikar bhed is another very interesting thing in the Mahabharata. For instance, the Eklavya story. Now, Eklavya is not a Dalit or, Eklavya is a Kshatriya child. I mean, his father is he's a Senapati. I'm forgetting which kingdom army. He's a Senapati, he's a Kshatriya. He wants to now learn. Now, why he can't be taught is not because he is not a Kshatriya. He cannot be taught because Dronacharya very well understands that he has been given the task to train the princes of the Kuru clan. Why? Because Kuru empire must be the greatest. So he has to be true to his mission. He can't take Karn, he can't take others. It's nothing to do with Karn being born, the way we portray all this. It's simply because his task is to ensure that the best, he doesn't want to, supposing for instance, North Korean president says all are equal, I am going to get nuclear technology from anywhere. You will say no, because that's where adhikar bhed comes in. So this was very well understood in ancient India, and they kept their interest in mind. So Dronacharya kept the interest of the Kuru clan. So he would not teach it to Eklavya, he would not teach it to Karna, and he would go out of his way to ensure that the interest of his empire are safeguarded. So to that extent, it is well within his means and limits to do what he does. Though it is justified in another way also in the Mahabharata, because as we know, the dog is barking because it's a hunter dog and it has sensed that, sniffed that there is somebody out there, and it's Eklavya who has put Dronacharya in Pratima and practicing archery. And this dog goes and starts barking, and Eklavya instantly pushes a volley of arrows and stuffs his mouth. And then Dronacharya gives a valid reason. He said, look at this fellow. He's supposed to be a mighty archer. He has no control over himself. He is using all his skills against a helpless dog, stuffing his mouth with arrows, giving him such a cruel death. What kind of a warrior he is going to become? So he refuses. Not only refuses, he takes away the thumb, which is important. Again, you see that story takes a very interesting turn of event, because the kingdom to which Eklavya belonged, they go with Duryodhana. Ideally, they should not have stood by Dronacharya. So that was a fight which was of a different nature, where nations were looking for their own existence and how to side with different forces. We see the forces same acting in India at this point of time. There are centripetal forces which want to disintegrate. They want a weak king at the top. They will support him by all the props because this suits their purpose. There are others who have an issue, which is about they don't care about who is at the center, but they are personally against. And therefore, they are personally attacking a prime minister because they have an axe to grind. And then there are others who are happy with the idea of a united India, and they want a united India because they feel they identify with Ikshvakus, they identify with the Pandavas and this clan which has always built beautiful empires. So when we look at Mahabharata from that perspective, so all that subtlest thing that Vyas has to say, he says it through Sri Krishna in the Gita. Now, of course, Sri Krishna never wrote anything, this for sure. The Gita is a verbal document, and it has been written by Vyas. Some people say that it has been later on added. But if we look at the Bhagavad Gita, it's very clear. It starts with the description of the battlefield. Several times, Sri Krishna reverts back to the scenario in which Arjuna is standing. He reverts back again and again that there is a war out there, Arjuna. You may die, but better you remember me and die. Either conquer the kingdom nobly, or if you have to perish, perish valiantly. All through, right up to the end, even in that Vishwarup Darshan, very clearly, he's showing the warriors which are right out there. They're all going into his mouth and emerging out of him. So we see that the Bhagavad Gita, of course, it's not that Sri Krishna wrote it technically, but whether Vyas documented it, whether Sanjay saw it, and whether it was written by Lord Ganesh. But one thing is very clear, that the Bhagavad Gita is written in the stress of deep inspiration by none else but Sri Krishna himself. That's how Sri Aurobindo puts it. Because if you look at the style is similar. Even in Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna is very different. He doesn't mince words. He doesn't mollycoddle Arjuna. He says, Arjuna, you are my good friend. If it is Ramayana, he will say, Arjuna, don't you feel how much I have loved you, how much I have cared for you? That would be Ramayana. Ram is telling to Lakshman, why are you doing this to me at this point of time? Don't you think it is right to do? Nothing. It is typically the way of Vyas. Shri Krishna starts a volley of literally verbal arrows, and each one a choicest word, and the same type of words, which we find in Mahabharata, where, Draupadi uses against Bhim in Kichaks. Bhim is sleeping nicely when Kichak is trying to outrage her modesty. And Draupadi comes and tells him, you claim that you are a brave man and a courageous man. What use is your courage? You are lying like a log, happy, you have taken food, and you're lying on the floor, and you think you are brave? Fie unto you. I mean, if you read those words, they are enough to shake even a dead man. And here is Bhim. He gets up, and the rest is history. This is the way, almost similar. Shri Krishna tells Arjuna, he chides him. You are talking, you have become like a Napunsak. What kind of a person you are? Clivium, you are Dorbal, you are weak. What are you doing? And typical way of Vyas, but inspired by Shri Krishna. That's how Sri Aurobindo puts it, that when we look at it, right through and through, the way he brings out the deepest profundities of dharma. And that deepest profundity ultimately is that action is the path that man must take, and his choices must be based on the way of dharma. Vivek, can you give me that iPad? So I'll just read a little passage because I'll forget the time. It is such a fascinating subject with many, many aspects of Mahabharata, but I'll just read something from Sri Aurobindo. This is so beautiful. Now, in the Mahabharata, now he admits that Mahabharata, there have been different writers. He says it doesn't matter, because whoever has done the additions have done it brilliantly. He says one can see the different styles. So there is the style of Vyas, and places there is the Ramayana style. But even that, he says that possibly when Vyas was young, so like any youngster, he had the romantic vein. And so we see the story of Nal and Damayanti with the swan going around. He brings it so beautifully. But even if there are many places where we see a strong Ramayanic bent or a weak Ramayanic bent, he says it has been done very beautifully, because whoever has added has taken the pains to weave it beautifully in the story. And therefore, he says Ramayana, Mahabharata is like a vast cathedral which has been built by many people. So, it's not like just one authorship. Okay, fine, there are other authors, but each one is embodying some aspect of the Indian soul. And to that extent, it's wonderful. So, there is a mass of writing in which the verse and language is unusually bare, simple, and great, full of form and knotted thinking. This knotted thinking is the story where Ganesh has to take time to understand what he's writing, what he's speaking. That story we all know. So the imagination strong and pure, never florid or richly colored. You see that in Ramayana. Rama is asking every leaf, where is my Sita? Where is my Sita? Nothing of that kind you will see in Mahabharata. When, Draupadi's modesty has been outraged, or she has been taken by Jadrat. It's not, oh, Draupadi, where are you? the Pandu princess go. Heroic. It's all about heroism of a very sublime kind. Humanly heroic, not superhumanly heroic. Humanly heroic. The idea is austere, original, and noble. There is another body of work, sometimes massed together, but far oftener interspersed in the other, which has exactly different qualities. So this he have already spoken of, but I'll just read one passage. Paucity of time, so and then we can have questions. Okay, so the Mahabharata is not only the story of the Bharatas, the epic of an early event which had become a national tradition, but on a vast scale, the epic of the soul and religious and ethical mind and social and political ideals and culture and life of India. So it embodies, that's why somebody has said, not only Mahabharata is the fifth Veda, because all the great ideas of the Vedas are there. And that whatever is there in Bharat is there in Mahabharata. And what is not there in Mahabharata is not there in Bharat. You can see it as a corollary. So we see it's a beautiful blend. Even those who have contributed have actually enriched it. So it's perfectly fine. The Mahabharata is the creation and expression, not of a single individual mind, but of the mind of a nation. It is a poem of itself written by a whole people. You see, when I went recently to Barcelona, I saw that wonderful, cathedral being built by different doors, and it's so wonderful, But though there is one person who is behind it, but several hands have gone into building it. So that's how Mahabharata is. It's the voice of soul of India. It is the poem of itself written by a whole people. And personally, if you ask me, whether you make Gita compulsory or not, that's a different thing. But every Indian should read Mahabharata. It's a story which is about us. It doesn't matter what religion you are. It's irrelevant. It's the story of a people, of a nation, how it thought, how it felt, how it chose, how it acted in a moment, it's its soul. We'll get connected with its soul. I mean, that's how I look at it. And that's the effect, at least Mahabharata had on me. Thanks to reading Mahabharata at a very young age, I could never identify with film heroes or sports people as my, ideals. So it was very clear. Ideal to Arjun hi hai. Ideal is Arjun and God is Krishna. All other things like, they pale into insignificance. This idea of being in rags and taking sannyas. After seeing Krishna on the battlefield, who would ever choose that ideal? And how beautifully brings out about Tyag, sannyas. Of course, Gita is a vast subject, and it's in the, and we see Siddhi Day, this is exactly what Sri Aurobindo did. He established once again the idea of an undivided India. We just talk about India, and the map which is made in the ashram playground is the map of an united India, which always existed incidentally. It has always existed. And this map was made in 1954 after the partition, because this is the map of true India. Akhand Bharat is not something which, we can debate or discuss. That's a different thing. It's the soul of a nation. You can't dismember a body which it is lived together. There are formations, there are energies released in these areas. So Mahabharata is the creation and expression not of a single individual, but the mind of a nation. It's the poem of itself written by a whole people. It would be vain to apply to it the canons of political art, applicable to an epic poem with a smaller and more restricted purpose. The whole poem, now look at this wonderful word. The whole poem has been built like a vast national temple, unrolling slowly its immense and complex idea from chamber to chamber. There's several mini stories. It's just unimaginable. If one just reads the stories which are offshoots in the Mahabharata, one would be richly rewarded. Every time the same thing is followed in Ramayana, but much more in Mahabharata. Every time they go to an ashram, see how these ashrams used to teach. They didn't charge money and give you a technique. They just wove a story. And through the story, they gave what they had to say. Something so amazing. We know Savitri is there in part of Yudhishthir's rendezvous with Markandeya. The whole poem has been built like a vast national temple, unrolling slowly its immense and complex idea from chamber to chamber, crowded with significant groups and sculptures and inscriptions. The grouped figures carved in divine or semi-divine proportions, a humanity aggrandized and uplifted to superhumanity, and yet always true to the human motive and idea and feeling. That's where he tempers. The strain of the real constantly raised by the tones of the ideal. The life of this world amply portrayed, but subjected to the conscious influence and presence of the powers of the worlds behind it. So you don't have, like in Ramayana, you have all the Navagrahas who have been captured, the Trilokadipati, no. But you have Arjun, who is the Ansh of Indra. You have Karna, who is the Ansh of Surya. So all these aspects are there, that there are the Godhead, the cosmic forces which are behind these agencies. That is there. Even the demons, you have an ogre, Baka, what was that fellow who was killed by Bhim? Anyways, whatever it doesn't matter. He is more about his appetite. He is an ogre. He is not like, when you look at the fellows in Ravana's time, Ahi Ravan, they are terrible. I mean, you can't imagine. But they are more at that level. So always there is that sense of the real. So he would create a character which goes beyond the pale of our human imagination. That's why for the modern mind, Mahabharata is more appealing. While Ramayana is more, those who have a psychic turn, those who feel from the heart, they find it very appealing. But Mahabharata appeals to the modern mind because it is the characters, even in their superhumanity, are human, true to the human aim. And the whole uplifted by a long embodied procession of a consistent idea worked out in the wide steps of the poetic story. So this idea, of course, we know, Sri Aurobindo brings out. At the same time, though supremely interesting in substance and vivid in the manner of the telling as a poetic story, it is something more. a significant tale, itihas, representative throughout of the central ideas and ideals of Indian life and culture. So what is that one word which describes Indian life and culture? Here he says, the leading motive is the Indian idea of the dharma. India never fought a religious war. This concept is an anathema because it's not about religion. Ravan is of the same religion. He's a Brahmin by birth, to boot it. Comes from a lineage of Pulastrishi, who is Brahma's lineage. His co-brothers are Kuber and cousins. Narad, who is his grandfather or chacha or something like that, He comes from that lineage. But the fellow must go. It doesn't matter. Why? Because he's representing a dharma. And more so because he is mighty, he is a knowledgeable person. And yet he falls in lust for a woman who is helplessly in a forest. This is not acceptable. So we see in both the stories, feminine figures become important to topple an empire. Here, Ravana has done many misdeeds. This is not the first time. But then here he crossed all limits. He goes to a forest where there is a lady in the hermitage who is unarmed. Her husband is not there. Nobody there to protect. And Ravana kidnaps her, takes her by force. This is not acceptable. This starts the downfall of the empire of Ravana. And there again we see Draupadi is dragged to the Kuru Sabha. Some people say it is not portrayed. It is there. Of course, maybe different authors. So she is dragged to the court, and this event marked the downfall of the Kuru Empire. So we see the power of the feminine who stands behind all these Pandavas, holding them together, because Draupadi is conscious of a mission. She is not on a personal happiness journey. No, I want only Arjuna. I want to be married and happily satisfied. This idea is an anathema to the Indian mind. It's not for personal pleasure or joys of the flesh. It is for the glory and greatness of the spirit that the Indian thought has lived. And that we see in Ramayana and the Mahabharata. None of the characters. Sita is not saying, oh, I had a comfortable life in the palace. Why are you sending me away? That's not the issue at all. The issue can be dharma. Debate can be over dharma, not over personal happiness, seeking of comfort. That we see how when they are abandoned to the forest, these Pandavas, how they go, they are purified by that ordeal. So we see constantly this idea of dharma. And dharma in the Indian context is not a rule book. It is not about moral ideas of right and wrong, because there are many gray shades and we have to make critical choices. And that's where the choices are made. The leading motive is the Indian idea of the dharma. Here, the Vedic notion of the struggle between the godheads of truth and light and unity and the powers of darkness and division and falsehood is brought out from the spiritual and religious and internal into the outer intellectual, ethical and vital plane. So there are human representatives. You just can't just internalize them that all war is inside. This is a neat way of finishing it off. It is inside, no doubt about it. You have to conquer hatred and anger inside. But it is also outside because they are representatives of a dharma. And you have to meet them, tackle them, take the challenge of life. And if necessary, they must pass out of existence. So this is here. So there are those who are embodying the greater ethical ideals of the Indian dharma, and others who are embodiments of asuric egoism and self-will and misuse of the dharma. The political battle in which the personal struggle culminates an international clash ending in the establishment of a new rule of righteousness and justice, a kingdom or rather an empire of the dharma, uniting warring races and substituting for the ambitious arrogance of kings and aristocratic clans the supremacy, the calm and peace of a just and humane empire. It is the old struggle of the Asura, Deva and Asura, God and Titan. The way in which this double form is worked out and the presentation of the movement of individual lives and of the national life, first as their background and then as coming into the front in a movement of kingdoms and armies and nations, show a high architectonic faculty akin in the sphere of poetry to that which labored in Indian architecture. So we see that now we can, because we can have questions. I'm fine with it. But to close that, look how Sri Aurobindo, even if we forget everything else, logical continuation of the work of the avatars. Parshuram, finishes the Haya kingdom when, the empire has gone Ori and it has forgotten the path of dharma. We see Ram once again builds an empire based on dharma, demolishing the forces which are of adharma. We see Shri Krishna once again defeating the forces of retrogression, paritranaya sadhunam vinashaya dushkritam, dharma sanstapna thai sambhavami yogi yogi, and once again securing Bharatvarsh, which for 3,500 years continues to be safeguarded. You see, there were foreign attacks during that time. Kal Yavan, who is Kal Yavan? But one of those Greek, Iranian, whatever side we may say. So probably a Greek. And he was the one who had attacked. So there were foreign powers which had entered. And yet, because of Shri Krishna's teaching and because of establishing the rule of dharma, we see that all these forces were repelled and kept at abeyance for almost 3,000 years. But then slowly the dharma fades, dharma siglani, and then we see a series of invasions. And the last bit of the power of Krishna, we see embodied in Rani Lakshmi Bai of Jhansi. And then long lull when suddenly everybody is sleeping, supplicating to placate, asking, begging for independence. And then once again we see, like the phoenix, Shri Krishna rises again, returns again, 1905 with Sri Aurobindo, declaring about Purna Swaraj, complete independence, brings life into a sleeping nation, establishes the soul of India, and then he once again, unarmed, sitting in his room, fights the great battle of the modern Kurukshetra, which was the second great war. So if we look at it, and all through, we see Sri Aurobindo's, again, one of his dreams is the dream of a united India, which is exactly what Shri Krishna did establish at that point of time. And then, of course, there is the other aspect, the dream of a united world, that was still not at that point of time in consideration. So all these things are, we can see Sri Aurobindo logically continuing Shri Krishna's work. And is it then little wonder that Shri Krishna chose to unite with Sri Aurobindo, which is the event we celebrate on Siddhi Day, when Shri Krishna, the personality of the avatar Shri Krishna, has come and fused with Sri Aurobindo, literally saying, now the age that is dawning is yours. Lead it, give the new Yug Dharma of the age, give the new Gita. And the Yug Dharma was the spiritual and supramental transformation, the age of integration where matter and spirit must integrate, synthesize. This is the new Yug Dharma. And the new gospel he gave in place of the Gita is Savitri. Namaste. I'm sorry, this has gone way beyond what I had. I think I had to restrain myself because it's a vast subject. But if there are any questions, I am always happy to take it.
So thank you, Alokji. I think it was a different way of understanding Mahabharat from it. Can you please mute yourself? Excuse me.
Can I ask a question?
Sure,
Yes,
second.
please.
One second, there are questions here. Let me just ask them, then you can ask. There are a few questions has come. So let me go through them if you don't mind, please. So
Yes.
One question, I think is a high schooler, because we had asked people if they want to ask any questions. So he has asked a question, why did Abhimanyu and Uttara's unborn son had to bear wrath of Brahmastra when the child was still in womb and couldn't have been carrying such intense bad karma from past life?
Yeah. So this question about Abhimanyu and Parikshit. So leave aside the bad karma. This is not in Indian thought. This bad karma, good karma has come much later. The theory of karma is very different. It's an evolutionary mechanism. And it's not about justice. It's about justice is there, but it's a very subordinate element. The main purport of karma theory is evolution through the choices we make. And this applies as much in everyday life. You don't have to bring in even the divine element. Your choices will either help you evolve towards a greater state or they put us down. And this regardless of You may get outer success by a certain kind of action and choice, but inwardly we may be impoverished. So karma is about that. It's a big subject, so I'm not touching upon that. But Abhimanyu, now you look at Abhimanyu, it's so interesting. Imagine Abhimanyu not dying the way he died. You know, paradox is we won't even remember him. So Abhimanyu's life typifies what Shaurya is. See, there is a term in Indian thought which is called Veer. So Veer comes from Virya. Virya is spiritual energy. Now, you see, warriors can be skillful. There are many skillful warriors on both sides. So, they are swift, they are bold, they are all these qualities are there. So that's like technique. They know the technique and the technology. And they also have the psychological making of a warrior. But there is something which Abhimanyu brings out, which is missing in almost all the warriors. And that is the energy of the soul. So when Arjun goes for a sacrifice, even till Abhimanyu goes for a sacrifice, even till today in the Indian war, you see that young Arun Khetrapal, he died just a young age of 21, or more recently Vikram Batra. Why do we celebrate it? By dying, they became immortal. This is a curve of destiny which a certain soul chooses. It's actually a leap. If Abhimanyu would have said, yeah, I know, I can't actually break I can't return back. Tauji, would you come along with me? Abhimanyu there is no glory of Abhimanyu. So these were people who lived for glory and they died for glory. See, did the Gita, this what Shri Krishna tells Arjuna. Either you conquer and enjoy the kingdom, but conquer it justly. Or if you have to fall nobly, protecting the people, but don't run away from this battle of life. So Abhimanyu typifies that door of glory which souls choose. And in the Indian context, we don't look at the life of one body or one form. So we always believe that those who die fighting for truth and justice and right, for them the doors of heaven open. So this is a way of saying that, well, they meet glory and they take another life way ahead. Now, there's many aspects to it, but again, I'm restraining myself. Then the second aspect is Parikshit. See, it's very interesting. The Pandavas, 5 Pandavas and Parikshit, what is unique about them? Of course, it included Karna also, but Karna lost that chance. That none of them is a human birth. You see, it's interesting. You see, in Christianity, we have the conception of virgin birth. Buddha, virgin birth. So this idea was that these are forces of a new order. They are forces that have not yet manifested upon earth. So the 6 Pandavas represent the new kind of forces. They are not born in the normal human way. I mean, there is a physical process, no doubt about it. But there are forces of other realms which have come. What about Parikshit? Now look at the story. Parikshit is destroyed in the womb, but Parikshit is revived by Krishna. So if you see, Parikshit himself becomes a child of the new consciousness. He is born embodying the consciousness of Krishna. Actually, Krishna has given him life. So he becomes literally the child of Krishna, who becomes the ruler of the future Indian nation. So it's a very, very beautiful story. Very significant, very symbolic. It's not about bad karma. If anything, it's about the good karma. To die to your old consciousness and be born as Krishna's child is something which I'm sure one would covet very much. Or to die a glorious death like Abhimanyu, defending truth and justice against the champions of unrighteousness, something very beautiful. To a warrior soul, it's something very beautiful. Yes, next question, Vivek ji.
Yeah, it's a little humorous, but I'll just ask anyway. Ravi is asking that Duryodhana earned a place in heaven too after the war. Is it?
Yeah. True. So that's another thing, that Duryodhana also earned a place in heaven. So earning a place in heaven was never considered something great in Indian thought. So heaven was like you can build a very nice house, wonderful house. So you have earned a place in heaven. So, but the story explains why Duryodhana earned the place in heaven. That there in the story. So none of us is completely black or white. This binary doesn't exist. There are shades of gray. So Duryodhana also has shades of gray. What is the gray side of Duryodhana? He is ambitious. He is, terribly ambitious, power hungry. But there are some very good things about Duryodhana. Duryodhana is shown as he lusts after power, but he doesn't lust after women, even though that's that place where he calls for Draupadi's this thing. But more importantly, the one quality, good quality about Duryodhana is that he wants to fight and then he wins. So he has courage inside him. He doesn't run away from a battle. Time to time, he is shown when the enemy is like much beyond his reckoning, but he doesn't want to run away from the war field. Unlike Shakuni's counsel and the ways of Shakuni, he succumbed to it, but there were some good elements inside him, and it is to these elements that they go after death into a that higher world. So this we can well understand if we read Yoga Vasishtha, where we see that the same person is simultaneously experiencing hell, simultaneously experiencing heaven. That part which was ambitious, lustful, greedy, that goes into the dark world, that part, everybody has a little beautiful side that goes in heaven for a while. But heaven is not a big deal. You return back. So in Indian thought, it was never going into heaven was considered great. Even the Gita mentions that those who seek after their desires, they go to heavens assisted by the gods. But then there are the great ones who seek after liberation. They seek after moksha. Moksha, not about otherworldly moksha, but freedom from ignorance. So that was the idea. So it's okay, let him rest in heaven. He missed the opportunity of being an instrument of the divine, which is a great loss. Okay. Yeah.
And next question is from Prashanta. In both Mahabharat and Ramayana, it is the woman who might have lost the most. For example, Sita, Draupadi, Kunti, Gandhari, etc. Is there any significance of this in your opinion?
No, they didn't lose. See, that's the beauty. First, I'll come to Ramayana, where we see extreme. See, look at the beauty of the poet. Imagine, of course, I know that Uttarkand is a debatable thing. Actually, it is debatable because there are elements in Uttarkand which it is there. Now, as we have received Valmiki Ramayana, it is not called as Uttarkand, it's the 7th book. But definitely when we read, there is an uneven passages and it doesn't feel like the rest of Ramayana. The character of Rama also doesn't go with the rest of what is there in Ramayana, but that apart. But actually, if you look at it from another perspective, what is Sita? Imagine if Sita would not have gone through what she went through. What would have happened to the feminine character? I find something very amazing about this aspect, that if Sita was not abandoned, if she didn't go through that Agni Pariksha or stay with, in that place with all these hardship, this Ramayana would have been a one-sided story of Ram. Honestly, it would have been then a very male-dominated story. But it has become a Sitayan, simply because Sita is the epitome of a woman who, even when abandoned by the husband, whatever be the, just cause and all, I have spoken about it, that there was a reason, Rajdharm, let's leave it aside. Let's say that she is abandoned. Now, what does a woman who is abandoned do? She could have gone and gathered the kings to protect her, got married, tried to attack Ram, thrown calumny against him. She does none of them. She goes to ashram, delivers her children. Those 2 children grow up into jewels, marvelous children, single-handedly. They don't carry a single bitterness about their father. In fact, they have heard only beautiful things about their father. That's how they recount Ramayana in the court of Ram. So they look at Sita, she brings them up together, not for once, even when later on they say, no, you please come back. She lives with her self-respect and dignity. So I think Sita's character has been ennobled through that. She's not a weak woman. She's not, suffering, Rama also suffered. If you see suffering, Pandavas suffered. Suffering is not something that Indian mind tried to escape from. But suffering was the test which steeled or purified the gold. I think to say that only Draupadi suffered and Pandavas didn't suffer would be quite an exaggeration. They both suffered, but both of them, Draupadi and Kunti on one side and Pandavas on the other side, they turned their suffering into a test of fire and they brought out the best out of it. That's what is the greatness of Draupadi. And that's how we see, just one more sentence, that see the story of Draupadi is epitomized when Yudhishthir goes and asks Markandeya, he says, has there ever been a woman more noble and chaste and yet who has suffered so much as Draupadi? Because he is weighing in his mind about the humiliation. And then Markandeya says, yes, Savitri, who suffered and conquered an adverse fate. So Nal Damayanti, all these stories, man and woman both suffered, if you see. But the thing is, what they made out of suffering is the issue. Indian mind didn't shrink from suffering. It didn't invite suffering either. It didn't love suffering. It didn't shrink from suffering. But when suffering came, it took it as a means to purify, and the best came out of it. That's what Draupadi and Sita is about.
Thank you. Another question is from Devendra Bhai, Devendra Patel, that he want to ask you about Akhand Bharat.
Yes, it's Akhand Bharat. To me, I've spoken about it. Even there is probably a separate talk on YouTube, I'm sure, by the name of Akhand Bharat, where I've tried in details what is Akhand Bharat. It's not a modern thing. It is not a creation of modern mind. Akhand Bharat has existed in the conception of the rishis. If you join the 51 parts of Sati all around, you will have Akhand Bharat. It's a spiritual conception. India is not a material land. It is a spiritual conception, and the land has, over a period of time, through the flux and flow of time, eventually it has undergone several changes. Names have changed, kings have changed, much upheaval has taken place. But India, actually the world, if you see from Savitri point of view, this world is a conception, spiritual conception. So same thing with India. And India, I'm sure it is true of all nations. So, but I'm focusing right now on India, that India is a spiritual conception. It's a Yajna-Vedi meant for the good of the world. And Akhand Bharat is not a requirement for just some vociferous Indians who love India sentimentally. No, Akhand Bharat is necessary for the world. And just as the mother once remarked that the sooner you build Matri Mandir, the better it is for Auroville. Let me say this very prophetically, that the sooner we have Akhand Bharat, the better it is for the good of the world. The more we delay it under any kind of, mollycoddling and looking good and appearing good, the more we are delaying the good of the world. And it's obvious if we look at the political scenario. Don't we see what is happening in that portion of Akhand Bharat, which has been done Khand? It has become the hub of all that could be done. It's like a limb becoming gangrenous. Even the other limb, Bangladesh, Myanmar, look at what is happening. It's becoming gangrenous. And okay, we may have a dismembered India, but it's dismembered India is not good for the world. Because if there is a light which can rescue the world out of its present state, it is India. And this I can say without a doubt. And, the facts are there to see it. Where do we find hope? Yeah.
Namaskar.
Namaskar.
I have a 100% faith that whatever Sri Aurobindo and Mataji said, but the way things are running right now, look at the Muslims are just want to integrate India plus Pakistan and Bangladesh and Afghanistan. How you gonna conquer this?
Take another prophecy. They are hurtling toward their doom. This is the path that will only accelerate their disintegration, because the world recoils very badly, and it is already beginning to recoil. And if those who are trying to disintegrate India and the world by these means, if they don't see the writing on the wall, it is going to hit back very badly, because already the recoil has begun. 20 years back, it may have been said that, they are doing menacing, but the world is beginning to recoil, because there is something like the world soul. It won't accept this for long. There is enough manhood and enough humanity and heroism and chivalry still in the world, enough goodness that it will not accept. See, politics is the last thing to change, but the average human beings are beginning to see through the game, not only in India, but all over. And this game won't last long. So this is the way they are hurtling toward their doom. Maybe 20 years, 30 years.
So the next question is, I think you have covered few of them, but I'll just ask the question if you want to add something. And the force is by Bernie. The force that exists in India also exists throughout the world. Is there any hope for the world to coexist, or are we destined for World War III?
I don't see a World War III. I see massive conflicts brewing in several areas. Because, as I said, war, unfortunately, is the mother of father, not mother. Heraclitus said it's the father of things. So there will be many conflicts in different parts of the world for the simple reason that, we are holding on to our fixed positions. But this conflict is likely to take two forms. One is the conflict of nations. This is not going to be the common one. The more common conflict will be within the people of a nation and the political system. This is the new war, if you like to call it, and it has begun, and it will upset many nations, probably weaken them, strengthen them. Nations have to go through this till ultimately they recover their lost soul. So it's a part of the process. These kind of, and they may take the form of, civil wars, not so much wars the way we understand. But this is part of the process, but not Third World War in the way, say, the Second World War or the First World War took place. Certainly not.
Thank you.
World conditions won't allow it. Yeah.
Thank you. Next question from Srivalli. Yudhishthir said to be embodiment of dharma, but it is Yudhishthir that gets into game dice. What
Yes.
can be the significance in the portrayal of the character this way?
Yes, so very beautiful. So dharma, that, as I said, dharma is a thing which is very subtle. And in Mahabharata, several places we see this dilemma coming up. Now, with Yudhishthir case, on one side, as a king, he is not supposed to refuse a challenge, even if it's a game of dice. See, that's the paradox. If a Kshatriya is called, and a king, particularly with a neighboring kingdom, that's how Nal loses all his wealth. So if he's invited to a challenge, game is a challenge, he can't say no because he is shrinking from his Kshatriya duties. So to that extent, he's going for, they didn't see as good or bad, it was a challenge. So he goes for that challenge, which he takes up. And to that extent, it was okay. But that's where the story shows that when, it's like Bhishma and Dronacharya, they have chosen to be with their own people, that there is a higher dharma, a higher standard which you must resort to when there are conflicts. So here, on one side, he is supposed to not leave the game when he is losing. You can't just do that. So he keeps on, putting things on stake, and there his mind is possessed. Obviously, even a man of a very, Sri Aurobindo had a very interesting answer to this when somebody who had practiced mental control for decades suddenly, lost it and went away. So Sri Aurobindo said, somebody asked, how could it happen? He said, haven't you known Yudhishthir's case? So a Sattvic man, Yudhishthir is a Sattvic man. Sattvic man is not a spiritual man. Sattvic man lives by dharma, but his control is not absolute. So there is definitely a moment when Yudhishthir completely lost that Sattvic impulse, because he was so much overtaken by Rajas. And at that point of time, he makes the blunder. The blunder is not on just about putting Draupadi at stake. You can't put even your kingdom at stake because it's not your kingdom. Actually, in the deepest sense, according to dharma, you can't even put yourself at stake. You can put your outer possessions at stake. So Yudhishthir, so that story typifies that even a man as great and as dharmanist, in fact, more so, because for a dharmanist to make one error can cost him very heavy. Whereas ordinary human beings, there is a great allowance given by nature. But again, as I said, Yudhishthir gets purified by the struggle. It all works out for good, because tomorrow Yudhishthir, in the ways of destiny, Yudhishthir will be coronated as the emperor, and destiny knows it. So destiny must prepare him for becoming the Raja who upholds dharma. So he goes through all the dilemmas of dharma. Even during one parv, he is asked questions by the Yaksha to ensure, who is none else but his father. Yaksh, he comes as Yaksh to make sure that Yudhishthir understands dharma. So then he is equipped to become the king, emperor. That's why Sri Krishna does not that time incite them to fight. They could have won had they come to fight that time with the entire Yadu clan along with their side. But at that point of time, he doesn't, because he has to be purified, go through the ordeal. So that story typifies that. Yes.
Thank you, Alokji. I think that
Can I ask a last question, please?
Sure, please. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you so
Yes.
much.
Yes.
Dear Alok, thank you so much for this beautiful, beautiful lecture, and all so helpful with so many ways. I reminded Mother said that there's only one country needed to stand up for the truth, Do you think that's going to be India? And do you think we will see that in this life for sure and life to come? How do you see that?
Yes, so Sri Aurobindo said that for this Chaturyug, that is that this four ages form a cycle. This is the seventh one. So he says that for this cycle of creation, India is the chosen country. It's not that it is every cycle in every age, but for this cycle, India has been the chosen country to uphold the highest values for mankind and eventually bring it out. And I have a very simple take on it. Apart from I could discuss the geopolitical scenario, but to take it in a very simple way, that since such has been the decree, it will happen, because all else can happen, but divine will eventually will fulfill itself. So I do trust the divine will, that if Sri Aurobindo said this in Yoga and its objects, that for this Chatur Yuga, it is Krishna, it is India which has been the divinely chosen country. So what divine has chosen, whatever maybe the difficulties, challenges, we can see it in 70 years, the way India bounced back and is beginning to show those signs, early signs of, recovering its lost, truth. I won't use the word glory and greatness because they have different connotations. It's lost truth, and just a matter of time. It has to rise for the good of the world, and it will be so. Sooner rather than later. Let me add to that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So anyone else, if have a question, we can ask. Otherwise, thank you very much, Alokji. I think it was a great way to learn Mahabharat from Sri Aurobindo's point of view, and really have a different view of the political landscape of the India, how it all happened. Just to note for all of us, we may again have an opportunity to listen to Alokji on 1st January. So please wait for the invite. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.